Hey, this is a bonus video of sorts that'll help you set up SDL Mixer, which is a library that is meant to load sound effects and music files and help you play them. So the very first thing is to find SDL Mixer, download it, and the website for libsdl.org has the project on there, but it's a little hard to locate. So really the easiest way is to just do a web search for it. SDL Mixer. And it'll come up with the SDL Mixer page, SDL Mixer 2.0 for SDL2, which is what we're using. And go down to Development Libraries. We want the Visual C++ version. We're going to download that. And when that's all done, you want to put it into your projects folder, wherever you're holding all of your Visual Studio projects and solutions, whatever, and unzip it. And of course, extract all. The default way to unzip things in Windows comes up with this extra folder, and inside that folder is the folder we actually want. So you can take that and cut it and then just paste it in here, and I've already done that. And then you can delete that folder afterward. So you'll just end up with the inner directory right there, with the include and the lib folders right in it. So it's laid out just like SDL2's library files. So the way that we set it up in Visual Studio is just the same. I'm going to be working with the Pong project, and just putting in just a little simple sound effect there. Go to your project properties, and you should see something like this, where if you go to Visual C++ directories, you have your include directory set to have SDL2 in there already, and your library directory is set to have SDL as well. So I'm going to edit this. And I'm going to copy this one. If you go up to where you have SDL Mixer, this is the include directory, and it put in that whole long path. And from the other video, I showed you how to use solution dir macro, so I'm going to do that. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing down here. I could just copy this and put the lib x86 after it. I'll do this quickly. Alright, that one. Alright, copying the macro. There. So that sets up the directories to point to where SDL Mixer is. And then in the linker settings, expand that, go to input. We have to add SDL2 Mixer to this list. So down here, SDL2 underscore mixer dot lib. Okay. Alright. And so that sets it all up for the library to be found. And if you remember, installing SDL, we had to bring the DLL from the library folder as well. So go into your SDL Mixer folder, into the libraries, x86 for 32-bit Windows, applications and copy the SDL2 mixer DLL. You'll notice that there are other DLLs in here. SMPEG2 will deal with, I think it deals with things like MP3s and other similar formats. And then there are a bunch of other ones for other audio formats. FLAC is a lossless codec, and OGG is a container for Vorbis. That's an open source free format. So you can take those as you want them. I'm just going to take the SDL mixer DLL, which at least has support for wave files, raw wave files. Then I'll bring that up to my project. I'm in the Pong project. So this is the solution folder. And in the solution folder, in debug, is where I'm dropping my DLL. Right there. Alright. So now in Visual Studio, I can start writing some code to make this stuff work. We'll need to include SDL Mixer's header. Include SDL Mixer.h. So that gives us access to all of the SDL Mixer functions. Now if I scroll on down to the main function here, I'm going to initialize SDL Mixer. Just like SDL starts all of its functions off with SDL underscore and its types as well, SDL underscore. SDL Mixer starts with mix underscore. And we're going to mix init first. That's initialize. And this just takes a bunch of flags for what we're going to initialize. I'm just going to use 0 to initialize the library itself. You could put in here mix init and use one of these different subsystems for different formats. And that just makes sure that it's loaded right away, and you don't necessarily need it, because if you were, say, playing MP3s, each time you load an MP3 file, SDL Mixer will try to load the MP3 library, the SMPEG library, so that it can read MP3 files, and then unload it when you're done, which, well, can sometimes cause little lag spikes in your playback when you're loading files in the middle of the game. But if you want to make sure that you avoid that, you can choose one of these. But I'm just going to use 0, so we're not even going to use MP3s. And then I want to mix open audio. So this opens the audio device for output. And so we have to tell it what kind of audio output we're going to do. And it gives us frequency, format, channels, and chunk sizes are all things we have to provide to tell it what kind of output we're doing. And I don't care really that much about all of these, so I'm just going to use the default values for most of them. Mix default frequency. That will be the default frequency, which actually happens to be 22,050, which is half of CD quality, so it's not even that good quality. You could put 44,100, and that's CD quality, which is pretty standard nowadays. But for even less effect on your CPU, this default frequency is alright. And then next, Open Audio takes a format, mix default format. So that just tells the audio device how we're going to be sending it data, what type of data we're sending it, and, well, we're not sending it the data explicitly, we're letting SDL Mixer do it, so the format's not so important. And then mix default channels. the channels here are output channels, like 2 means stereo, 2 channels, and 1 channel would be mono output. It's kind of weird because later SDL Mixer uses the word channels to refer to something totally different, mixing channels as opposed to output channels. For now, this is just stereo output by default. And then the chunk size is how much data is being sent to the audio driver at a time. And numbers not too important, just that lower numbers are going to give you less delay. If you want your sounds to happen right away, really quickly when actions happen, lower numbers are good. But there's a chance of if you go too low, you'll have stuttering in the audio output. But if you go too high, then you'll have a long delay before sounds are heard. So I'm just going to put 1024. That's a 1024 is a pretty even, nice number that computers enjoy. So those are all my reasonable default values. And then when we're all done with things, before we SDL quit, we're going to call mix quit, shut down SDL Mixer. Now you notice I didn't put any if statements around these. You could check to see that these calls complete successfully and quit if they fail. But I don't think audio in this program is all that important to the game, so if it fails to produce audio, no big deal. We'll just keep going. So now in Dupong, that's where we're going to be playing our sounds. Problem is we don't really have a sound yet. So we can set this up. We can at least say mix chunk star. So that's the type of a sound effect in SDL Mixer. It's a chunk of data that we're sending to the audio device. And I'm going to call it a explosion, because I'm just going to make a exploding sound happen. And then I want mix load wave. And you pretty much use load wave for any kind of loading that SDL Mixer does, even if it's not wave format. And then the file, explosion.wave. That's the one I'm going to use. So however you get your sound effects is fine, but I do have one quick place that I use sometimes. BFXer. It's a evolution of SFXer, which was a pretty popular sound effect generator for like little tiny indie games and game jam games. And BFXer is a web version of it, with all these different things you can mess with. But all I did was click on explosion and export it and saved it. And now then I was ready to use the sound. So I took that sound and I put it in my project folder. So if you go to your solution folder, you have to go into your project folder, and in here, next to your VCX project file and your source, is where you should put your data files, and mine is explosion.wave. Alright, so back in Visual Studio, we've just loaded our explosion.wave, and then, of course, when we're done with it, I want to mix free chunk explosion. And then I want to use it somewhere. So I'm going to make it real simple. If event.type key.keysim.sim is space, then I'm going to play a sound on a given channel. So these are the mixing channels that I was speaking of before. mix play channel takes the channel to play on, the data chunk to play, the sound effect to play, and how many loops it's going to play for. So the channel, I said before, is the in this one it's the mixer channel, and by default SDL Mixer uses 8 channels, so that means 8 different sound effects can be playing all at once, and then it mixes all of those sounds together to give you the final result to the audio device. But we don't really care which channel it's played on. They don't matter for this. So -1 will tell it choose the first open channel that's not playing any sound. And then we want the chunk, which is my explosion sound. And then the number of loops. I'm going to put 0 loops, because I just want it to play once. And then you can try it out, build it, and run it. So if everything's in place, we should have our Pong clone running, and whenever I press the space bar, an explosion sound. Yep, sounds like it's working. So there are a bunch of other features of SDL Mixer, and if you want to look up more, go to the website, the project site, and there's a documentation link. This documentation is actually kind of outdated. It's for the old version, but SDL Mixer hasn't really changed much between 2 versions, and all of this is still works for SDL Mixer. So you can check out the functions, and there's how to set up the library, and how to load files, and how to play files. There's music as well. Unfortunately, SDL Mixer uses a single channel music system, and it's streaming straight from the disk. So you can't mix multiple songs together, and you can't do cool things like crossfades really easily. So one way to work around that is to load your music as a chunk instead of as a music file, as a music object, and you can mix multiple chunks together using the normal channel system that they use there. But other than that, it's a great little library that gives you a lot of options for music and sound playback. It's really great. And that's it for setting it up and using it. So check out this website for the documentation. Let me get back there. Documentation in the download, and choose any of these ways to present the documentation, and it's all there for you. Alright, see you next time.